Good afternoon, everybody. I hope you still have a bit of energy to listen to my talk. I know that's the end of the second day and people start to get tired. I am Luc Bourlier. I'm a senior software developer at TypeSafe. TypeSafe is the company behind Scala, Akka, and Play. We provide development support and production support for our clients. And about 2 years ago, we started to also add support for Spark, mainly targeted for the interaction between Spark and our own products. So in this work, we did one part was focusing on Apache Streaming and making sure that it works fine with other tools. So a short description of the agenda. So everything is about back pressure in this talk. So back pressure in Spark Streaming, reactive application, which needs back pressure, reactive stream, which is an interface for back pressure, and then a demo of back pressure. So what is back pressure? Back pressure is the idea that a slow customer should slow down a fast producer. What you try to fix, to avoid, is to get to the point where the producer is sending so much data that your customer cannot handle it anymore, and you get stuff like buffer overflow. The classic example of back pressure is TCP. If you look read on to the TCP frames, there is information on the frame passing on each direction about each side of the TCP connection, saying that, okay, this is how much data I'm still able to accept without going over my buffer. So that's back pressure. Spark Streaming. I will go really fast on the description of what is Spark Streaming. I kind of hope that people kind of know already more or less how it works. So the short description is it's like Spark normal. It's like normal Spark, except that you work on mini batch on mini RDDs. The data, the input data is coming in. It's stored in RDDs, and then every so often, so you're scheduling your streaming scheduling. Every so often, you say like every 5 seconds or 1 second, you execute the operation on the mini RDD. So one thing we worked TypeSafe with Databricks is to improve the congestion support in Spark in general. So up to Spark 1.4, there was no real good way to manage congestion on Spark. If you had too much data coming in, you could get to a lot of problems, and there's no way to get a good limit or things like that. So the only thing you could say was max rate, which is just a flat number of saying that, okay, I think I can handle so many messages without crashing. To make it work, you have to be conservative, because if your number was too high and then your Spark Streaming application was not able to support the load, it will crash. It also means that it's kind of really difficult to find a value, because if your cluster grows, normally your capacity to process data grows also. And it was one limit for all streams in your application. So, which can be a problem when you start to merge stream of data. The classic example is a stream of data with signing information, and then another stream of data with session information. So the signing has the information about session ID, and everything else is linked to session ID, and you want to merge it together. But because you have one limit for all the streams, you may just put it too low to get a good performance. So in 1.5, we're adding back pressure. So the way the back pressure works in 1.5, it's a dynamic rate limit. We have a rate estimator which computes after each round of mini batch. It computes the estimated number of elements that it should be able to handle in each mini batch. This information is sent to the receivers, and the receiver takes the information and do what they need to do. So one example is the Kafka direct connector. We just send the information to the Kafka direct connector, and the Kafka direct connector says, okay, you tell me that I can manage only 1,200 requests a second, input a second, it's only what I'm going to send to you. And for the other receivers, so everything which is based on TCP, the implementation is interesting, which is basically it's doing it's slowing down the application, the part which is reading data from TCP, to just slow the input of data, which create problems that I will speak about after. So how does the rate estimator works? So at the end of at the end of the completion of each batch, is a computation which trying to get a good idea of how many elements per batch, per second, in fact, in this case, it can be processed. The rate is more or less the number of elements that has been processed divided by the processing delay, which is how long it takes to process so many elements. So that's a really simple way to see the problem. But that would mean also that if at some point you start to accumulate delay, you will keep the delay because you say, okay, I can manage, I don't know, 10,000 messages, and at some point I did go a bit over like to 12,000 messages for some reason, and then I have a delay because it takes too long it took at some point too long to process the 12,000 message, and the delay of computation is staying there. So what we use is proportional integrated derivative algorithm, PID to be short. It is not something new at all. It has been one of the well-known usage of PID is to be able to not driving, I say that, to pilot huge cargo ships. If you take a huge cargo ships and you start to turn the wheel of the ship, at some point the ship will turn, but you don't get an instant response on the ship. So this algorithm is made to manage a system which takes some time to return a different value. Why do we need that in Spark Streaming? Is because there's a difference between the time that you finish to process your mini batch, and while you're processing your mini batch, the next mini batch is already being created. So if you don't limit well enough the size of the mini batch, the next mini batch, then you will start to get problems. Let me think. Yes. And one thing which is really interesting of PID is it does manage the fact that you may have accumulated some delay at some point. So it will reduce the number of elements it says it can accept to be able to resolve the delay and process all the data as fast as possible. So that's back pressure 1.5. So different with 1.4 is that each input has its own estimator. So if you have a different speed, it manages correctly that. It works on all stream receiver, including the Kafka direct input stream, which is in fact the best support we have in back pressure in 1.5 right now and 1.6. And the configuration is really straightforward. It's just you enable it and you do put the minimal rate. Otherwise, you could just basically starve your system, saying that at some point, oh yeah, I cannot process any data, and then the system say, well, yeah, but you're not processing any data, so I cannot compute a new value for how much data you can be processed. So you need a small minimum rate. How does that look? It's kind of readable. Well, readable, not readable. It's you can see. Those graphs are a demonstration of what happens if you don't have back pressure. So we have a mouse, yes. So this is the amount of messages that have been sent to the Spark system. So you just see a spike. I mean, it's not quite a spike, it's a huge bump. So at some point, we just doubled the amount of messages going into the system. And this is what happened when you don't have back pressure. The red bars are delays. So I don't remember, I think it was 5 seconds. I was trying to get a 5 second mini-batch interval, so I'll try to get a result every 5 seconds, but it takes about 7 seconds to process. So the first one takes 7 seconds to process, and the next one starts 2 seconds late, and then 2 seconds more late, and late, and up to the point that, well, you have a 5 second interval, and you get results 35 seconds late. And yeah, I didn't run the program really long, it's just grow really fast. One interesting point is also this blue line, which is the amount of memory available on the executors. The way I configured, I mean, I kind of, the goal was kind of to break a bit the system. So I configured the system to use only memory, no caching on disk. I think. Yeah, memory to use only memory, no caching on disk. And at some point, if I keep the program running for long enough, the memory goes to 0, and the application just doesn't respond anymore. If you at some point, it might be able to get back to some state. Anyhow, this is exactly the same use case, but with pushback, back pressure, sorry, enabled. So you see that when the spike arrives, it starts to process. It starts to take some time to process the data, and you do accumulate a bit of delay. But the PID sees that there is a bit of delay accumulating, and you see that it has too much data coming in, so it starts to reduce below the real value that you can process, the amount of input it takes. And then to get to a state which is stable, the mini batch takes exactly the time defined in the scheduling delay to process. So there's, there's a bit slowdown on the memory here. It's just because it's on the recovery. It's doing some stuff. Yeah. Oops. Yeah. So on what we have right now, there's still a few limitations. The system assumes linearity, which means that it assumes that all elements take the same time to process, in average, which could be a problem if you have if you don't have not in this case. Yes, that's the thing. And also something I really don't like is if you use the Kafka direct connector, it's really good. But if you use TCP connectors, you start to the way the system works is it slows down the input of the acceptation of data from the TCP connection, and your pull user start to fill up the TCP cache, which I have another drawing which shows that basically it can be run really nice to get fast and good results. Okay. Next point. So that's Spark streaming with back pressure, and I think it works pretty well, our side. Let's speak now about the second part of the talk, which are reactive applications. So for people who don't know anything about reactive applications are applications that are following the rules defined in Reactive Manifesto. The idea of reactive applications and Reactive Manifesto is just looking at the state of software development right now, and right now, it's not new, it's been a few years already. When before you could create a web application which was taking a few seconds to reply, and you could have like a 2 hours downtime every week or something like that. People don't accept that anymore. So all the information which are described in Reactive Manifesto are basically just description of what you should do to get a modern application. So there's 4 main traits of a reactive application. So the first one is it has to be responsive. User does something, so it has to have an expectation of getting a result in some fairly in timely manner. I mean, it can take. It's like real-time systems, a real-time system from a long time ago. It's not so much that it has to be fast. It's that you have to know exactly what is the top boundary of the response. It has to be resilient, which is linked to responsiveness. It has to be responsive in face of failure. There's a lot of description about how to do that. Mostly is to have the split between the systems and to always return some information, even if we're not able to compute. To send back information about the fact that you are not able to compute what the user asks and not errors and things like that. Elastic, so to be able to react to load, basically, on both sides. If you start to get more load on your system, you likely need to spin off more servers, things like that, or maybe stop some servers that are doing some background processing. And also, when the workload is going down, to shut down some of those machines because they cost you something. And all that relies on a message-driven system. So the whole idea behind reactive application is basically everything should be asynchronous and using message passing. So reactive streams. Reactive stream is one of the tools. So one of the things I didn't say about reactive manifesto. Reactive manifesto is not about using this technology or this technology. It's using technology which fits with with specific ideas. And reactive stream is one part of the technology you can use to get reactive applications. So reactive stream is a really small JVM interface, or in fact 3 interfaces and 7 methods which define how to communicate back pressure between your components. Because it's nice to have, right now we have in Spark, we compute back pressure and it's sent, but it is, if you're using TCP connection, it is blocked at the TCP level and the function of the back pressure doesn't really go up well. It is in the TCP channel, but it's hidden, it's not at the application level. So reactive stream, the idea is to be able to connect components together and to get this back pressure information going through the whole system. Let me check. Nope, that's not what I wanted to do. That's not what I wanted to do, so. Okay, so just a quick look at the APIs. You see 4 classes in this case, but the processor is just a publisher and a subscriber. Okay, 9 minutes. Publisher is something that you can subscribe to with a subscriber. And when somebody subscribes to a publisher, the publisher sends to the subscriber subscription, and from this point, it sends elements to the subscriber. So that's on next is when you get normal elements. On complete is when your stream of data is finished, and on error is when something went wrong upstream. And you have a subscription, which is a way for the subscriber to manage its connection with the publisher. And it's where you get the back pressure, because the subscriber tells the publisher through the subscription, okay, this is how much space I have. Basically, the idea is this is how much space I have in my buffers, this is how much data I can receive without blowing up. And you can just cancel the connection. Okay. Play. End-to-end back pressure. So, we have reactive applications, which can have reactive connectors. You should have reactive connectors. So these are back pressure enabled. We have Spark Streaming 1.5, which has back pressure and back pressure information. So the next step is basically to create in Spark, for Spark, a receiver, a streaming receiver, which understands totally back pressure to reactive streams. So another small graph to show why is it interesting to have reactive stream compared to have TCP connections. So the top 2 graphs are the same example as before, same use case of having a spike of data. And the other one is using the current TCP connection, TCP implementation, and that's the same use case using what I will show you as using reactive streams connectors. So one thing we see is in the reactive stream connector, the red part there is data which is basically thrown away. I mean, you can implement it the way you want, but in this specific case, we say that if we know we cannot send enough data to the streaming engine, we just drop the data. So you see that it starts to drop fairly early and continue to drop. The thing is when the load decreases, then it stops dropping data. It just processes full data at full speed, which means that if your system, if you encounter a problem and you configure your system, what you can do maybe like not all data you have to send to streaming is critical. Some data is interesting. So maybe if you see that your system is overloaded, just drop the non-critical data. So this is a implementation with using a TCP pushback, TCP back pressure. And the thing you see is that, so at some point we do drop packets because the TCP, we'll see, the TCP channels are full. you go through all the routers and everything, and everybody which is going through the chain of TCP connection is just full as a buffer. So your connection on the producer side says, well, I cannot accept any more data. So we do drop some data, and at this point we drop everything because we cannot repush anything. There's no choice. But also what we see is it takes a long time to recover, which means that between this time and this time, what is processed is not the data coming from this set of this part of the use case, but the data which was coming from before. So you're not processing data which is up to date. You still have to empty the TCP buffers and to process this data. And it depends what you want to do and what you need to do, but it can be a problem. Dropping data is not so much, but we are seeing people doing fraud detection with for credit cards, and they need to have an answer now. I don't know if it's a problem for them to kind of drop some data, but at least they need to have an answer now. So, demo. This is the application I created to show what's happening, to show a demo of back pressure through and through with a reactive application and Spark streaming. So what the reactive application does is doing some different computations to get pi. Using this type of algorithm just by doing filling random points and checking if they are inside or outside of the quarter of cycle. So it starts with a random number generator, and to be able to get points, we pair the int we get, and I wanted to kind of check because, I mean, random number generators are fun, but if you do weird things with the data you get out, you might not get so much random data, well, less random data at some point. So the idea is to compare when you slice. So basically, to do a pair, you take two consecutive numbers, and when you do windowed. So to take a pair, you take two consecutive numbers, and the next window overlap with the previous one, and it overlaps like that. And then there's some ways to compute pi, and it sends everything in one stream, and the data is sent to Spark to do some analysis. So, yep. Let's see. That's not what I want to display. Let's see what's happening. So I have my small application. I have a small console for my application, which gives information about the rate of the random number generator, some of the values of pi which is created, and information about how the Spark streaming job is going. So let's start everything. Let me check. So the first version of the test, I will do it with back pressure disabled, just to see what it does. And we need two steps. We need to start the application. Here. And we need to start the Spark job. Okay, so you can see that already there's some data coming in. My random number generator is generating 10 values a second, so it's not really high, and which result in 15 records in Spark. It's because it's when the data is split and we joined. And if we look at the streaming page on Spark, you have no scheduling delay and processing time is really low. So let's put a bit more data. So let's go to 100 messages a second. So you see that, I mean, I don't know if you saw, but the rate automatically went to 100, so it's what we want, and the number of records went to 150, and it takes about 200 milliseconds to process the data. I have a job, Spark job, set to a 1 second scheduling delay. Patch interval, sorry. Scheduling delay is still good. We get more data, it's good. Okay, let's double this. Okay. So the rate is going up now to 200, and the number of records using by Spark is also going up. It's good. Execution time is still below the 1 second, and we do have like a few milliseconds of scheduling delay just because our system is working. So we're still fine, no problem. Let's double that again. Okay, so now we generate 400 messages a second, and there's 1,200 record accepted by Spark. And the execution time gets to 1.3 seconds. And our scheduling delay for each batch is growing slowly. We are 3.6 second delay, 4 seconds. And if you look at the graphs, scheduling delay is just going up straight away. So this is the mark of an unstable system. At some point, it will just crash. So we can get it to recover a bit just by reducing the amount of data we send. And it recovers. So the amount of data received is way, way lower. It does take still some time. It does still take some time to recover. It's still processing the old batch, which has too much data. Okay, so it did recover. It went and processed all the small batches. So let's restart this application, but this time with back pressure. To save that, need to kill everything. Oh, it's 0. So I'm just finishing that, and then we can have questions. So yeah, we start the application itself, and we start the Spark job. Is it working fine? Yeah, so we started again, so we have 10 requests, and it's going fine and everything. So let's go directly to 200, because we know, oops, 200, because we know that's working fine. Execution time should go up, only to 3. Oh, why? Why is my execution time not higher? Yeah, I'll say it's fine. It's 6. Yeah, it's okay. It went up enough. And now we get back to the state where you have too much data. So we see the rate jumping to 400 and then going down. This is Spark streaming, seeing that, oh, I'm getting too much data. I need to slow down. I need to slow down the input of data and send information to the application that it is too fast. And if you look at the graph, so the line here is the schedule, is the batch interval. So we try to never go too much over 1 second, and this is just scheduling delay. We have a bit of scheduling delay just because this specific implementation of the connector is asking for a little bit too much data. I have another implementation which I was not able to use in this test. So yeah, you can see that we don't go crazy with scheduling delay like all the time. We stay in 150, 119 milliseconds. And if we reduce the amount of data, it directly, it would be nice to refresh on this thing. It directly reduces the processing time, and there is no delay at all on responsiveness of the system. Okay. So yeah. What's next? So what I have right now is a really small patch on Spark Master, because we still need to modify one API in the streaming receivers. So we were trying to get it in 1.5, but it was an API change, so we cannot 1.6, sorry, but so we cannot get it. So we are pushing to get the change in Spark 2.0, and then we're also working on making sure that the new version of streaming, the structured streaming, also support correctly recti streams. And we need to publish a recti stream receiver so people can play with it. There you go.
All right, excellent. Now, if we have any questions, we can take some now. Right here.
Yeah, simple one. It wasn't clear to me, where is this available? What version? I know you just said it, but I didn't understand.
It's a slightly tweaked master of Spark.
It's in, where, say again?
It's not in master yet. We need to have, there's a requirement to get a small API change on streaming receiver.
And then it will be available?
Yeah, so our goal is to push it for
hopefully
2.0.
to get into 2.0, okay.
Yeah.
I got it. And the second question is, when it gets back to, if your Kafka is your source, right, Kafka itself doesn't have any notion of back pressure, right? Because it's just kind of you pulling stuff off of it.
Yes,
right?
but in fact, Kafka was already, we didn't have to do anything, in fact, on the Kafka receiver. So there was already a limit you could set to say, don't go over this limit of messages pulled by Kafka.
Right, because you're pulling
and now instead of having a fixed limit, we just give the dynamic limit.
Got it.
And it just goes.
Thanks. All right, one here.
This is more about reactive streams and RxJava than Spark Stream. So you mentioned like a reactive application has to be responsive all the time, but sometimes if you see like undue IO load or like database taking long, is there anything that you can do?
Well, so the thing is, responsive doesn't mean that you get doesn't mean that you get exactly the answer you want really fast. Is you do get an answer really fast. The answer really fast might be, sorry, we are a bit overloaded right now. And the goal is application to fix this problem as fast as possible, so you don't get testing. So you need in your active application, you do need to have some circuit breakers and things like that to handle the fact that at this specific time we are not able to handle the request. And so the application needs to be aware of the fact that it is a possibility.
All right, any more? Any more? Excellent. Let's have another round of applause.
Thank you.